Good evening, Thando Book Club lovers. We are here with another edition of the Thando Channel Book Club, and we are so happy to have you here because tonight's going to be a super duper treat. So, as is our custom, we like to start every book club broadcast with a quote from an African author. And today's quote is from Sandra Fin Dufay, and she's a Cameroonian actress, author, and screenwriter, best known in writing for her trilogy, the Yefon trilogy set in 1940 West Africa. And the quote from Sandra today is, "Whatever you are looking for is also looking for you. You see, don't only look, be available and ready when it shows up." And I chose this quote because as we have our discussion tonight, I think it encapsulates a little bit of Natasha's journey as a writer, but definitely, I think, the journey of the two protagonists in the book that we will be talking about today. So welcome, Natasha. How are you?
I'm fine, Selina. Thank you so much for having me. Thando Book Club. It's always amazing. I always love being in the presence of book clubs. It's it's always such a privilege and so heartwarming. So thank you for having me tonight.
Awesome. We are great to have an accomplished writer such as yourself in the house. For those of you who are yet to fall in love with Natasha's work and her writing, I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. Natasha Omokhodion Banda is a UK-born Zambian of Nigerian and Jamaican heritage who lives in Lusaka, Zambia. Married with 3 children, she is passionate about the growing literary scene in Africa and enjoys the power of storytelling. She has been published in the African Women Writers Afri-Wari e-publication anthology, Different Shades of a Feminine Mind, and featured on AfricanWriter.com for her story, To Hear is Human, To Forgive is Design. She has been published in Short Story Day Africa, Hotel Africa 2019. She also has quite a fascinating story called Esmeralda on Duk Literary Magazine. I really encourage you all to look that up. I found that very interesting. And the manuscript for her novel, No Be From Hia, was selected as Grey Wolf Africa Prize Finalist 2019. This novel has been published twice, and it's currently under publisher rights with BlackbirdBooks Africa, which we love here at the Thando Channel Book Club. So that is a little bit about Natasha, but I think we often like to know about our writers in terms of why did they start writing in the first place. So Natasha, take it away. Why did you get into writing at all?
Thanks so much, Selina. I think I always did write, but as I sort of, went to university, started working, started with my career, you sort of put it on the back burner and think it's not part of adulting, at least in our days. It was like, now, so for a long time I did put it away. But it sort of just came back to me. I feel like writing came after me, like it just came back. And each time I did a piece or did begin something, it was always from a point of conviction or this really great need or urge to just get it down on paper and then slowly improve it or rework it. So about 5 years ago, I began to write again. I think the first piece that I began to work on the first time was To Hear is Human and To Forgive is Design. And that one took a while for me to coalesce my thoughts and what I was trying to say. And it was really helpful when it was accepted by by the African Writer magazine. And later on, I think I tried again with a short story for Short Story Day Africa, which was rejected. And I always say I'm so thankful for my rejections because I feel like the more rejections you have, the luckier you get. So the Short Story Day Africa story in particular was really important because it was a rejection, a good, solid rejection. And it made me go back and start to read what other work was coming out and the nuances and sort of like how everyone was playing with stuff, with language and observations. And then it just so happened that Short Story Day did send out a really good team of, I would call them mentors, into different countries in Africa. And because I had been rejected, I was on that list and invited to a workshop. And I got to get workshop by Nick Muhlongo. I got to meet Suki Swavana, James Mura, who were have been extremely instrumental in pushing me, giving me that push, which I may not have gotten if I didn't submit and get rejected in the first place. And lastly, I had written a story, also unsure what to do with it, here in Zambia, and it was picked up by our Zambian Women Association of Writers. I didn't know they existed. I had just written a story. And once that happened, it also was a great platform to say, you know what, you can actually take this seriously. And not only that, there's a whole tribe that is like you. There's so many other Zambian writers out there. So I found that the rejections were very important to keep the journey going and to build the community and bring forth the people that I needed to keep me going and keep me writing. Yeah.
Well, having read a little bit of your work, I'm actually a little bit bewildered when you say that you got rejections, and that it made the writing better, because I'm just like, well, some of that is really well put together and really well layered together. For instance, to hear is human and to forgive is design is very relatable to, I think, a lot of women, and the journey with hair, and how I think hair has become symbolic of identity politics, right? So the texture of our hair and the wanting to be natural and skin lightening and all of these things around identity and image and what is Africanness, and how sometimes, this new generation or millennial African can be almost out of reach or inaccessible to actually the daily lived reality. I thought it was terrifically layered, that story, but also found that there was quite a keen sense of humor. And that was quite interesting to me, because the few chapters of No Be From Hia that I've read, the ones I've come across have been very heavy with emotion. Like I've been like, as I've been reading them, but we're still a little bit away from there. Let's actually talk about how No Be From Hia came about, because I mean, a lot of the writing we've talked about is short story form, and No Be From Hia is quite a I don't want to call it heavy, but it's meaty. That novel has substance. You packed a lot in I think half of the size that other people would have done, and it is substantial, and you have a way of using vivid detail to paint very powerful and memorable pictures. So how did that come about, when all up until this time you'd been doing short story fiction?
Thank you so much. Like, just hearing you talk, I gotta just stop and say thank you. I feel like, for me, I've always approached the work like I'm a student of the work, like I'm a student of the art. I still feel like I'm every day, and every story is teaching me something new, and so is every social observation, or emotional connection, or whatever it is that prompts me to get up and write something. So I feel like it's a learning process, and perhaps that is what has even led to what is now No Be From Hia, because I didn't honestly set out saying I'm going to write this novel. It really did start with that short story I first spoke about, that was picked up by Zambia Women Writers Association, initially called Banana Boat, but it was character heavy, too loaded. It needed to breathe and grow. And I knew that I would turn it into a longer form story, but at the time I didn't know if I had the skills or chops to go as far as write a full length novel. On the other hand, I did go through some sort of like big life events where I lost my grandparents on both sides of my family. And I just had this innate curiosity, or need to ask the questions I had never asked. For some reason, as African kids, when we have our grandparents around, you just, okay, we've got them around, but you don't sometimes, for some people, do not question further and say, what was it like when Mama was growing up? Or what was it like, how did they come to meet? How did everything come to happen? So I think I was going through a very existential questioning period when I lost them. And for me, because on my father's side, it's half Jamaican, half Nigerian. On my mother's side, Zambian. But so already it was that sort of like, but what are the odds that these guys would have come together? And when I went back and said, okay, I'm curious enough to research the periods in which they lived, which also turned out to be fairly monumental and very important in world history. You know, I have a grandmother who moved from Jamaica to United Kingdom during the time of the Windrush. A grandfather who moved in the 50s to study further and better his life. And on my maternal Zambian side, I have grandparents who were active freedom fighters during the time of the Federation, Nyasaland, Southern Rhodesia, and Northern Rhodesia. And for me, just those eras, those times, I was like, what was it like? So I just went into this frenzy and period of research, and I was just really, I took the fictional character that I created in my first short story and used them to create another whole fictional story using these threads. And that's how I came up with No Be From Hia. So combining the two somehow, I just went back to the board and said, look, if we plot this out and we speak from the voice of the women in a multi-generational story, what would we have? And slowly but surely we got to what we have today.
So what would, I mean, the journey has been long. And the, like, you know, the multiple rejections were also a part of this story of getting the novel out. And you often speak about how the novel you started out with and the novel you have now today are two very different drafts of a manuscript. And you went through quite a detailed and interesting publishing story. What advice would you give to young writers seeking to publish today? And sort of looking back with a what would I have done differently sort of gaze on your publishing process?
Okay. I have come to learn now that the biggest asset you have, wherever you are sitting, please, if you're listening to me, is your truth. I think once you have your truth and you hold on tight to it and you make that conviction to write your story, please go ahead and write it. That is what will give you your voice. You'll start to hear people talk about, oh, you have voice. That's only because you're telling a truth. And sometimes telling the truth means you're telling it from only a way that you can say it. So say it, shout it loud. And I think just write it how you want to. I think I just wanted to write a story that was true to what I see or felt. And I did, and I would encourage anybody to do that. In saying so, there does come a point where there's some commercial decisions to be made. I decided to go the self-publishing route. But again, after sort of having gone through the mill and getting what I consider very respectable rejections and editorial feedback. And I used that to revise and rework and finally get it to a place that I was happy with. And I also used a lot of readers, sensitivity readers as well, because I'm dealing with a lot of different cultural groups and issues. So it went through a lot of sensitivity reading, multiple edits. So I was not alone in this journey. And I would encourage you as well. If you want to go and self-publish, I would say do so if you'd like to. And if you know you are ready to take what comes with it, because when we write books, we're constantly making decisions. You're making a decision whether to include this character, what does this representation mean, and so on and so forth. So by the time you're done with it, you should be convicted and know that, yes, this is what I'm doing, full of conviction, sorry, and say, this is what I'm doing. I'm ready to take both the hits and the compliments, but this is what I'm sharing with the world. So I would say go for it. I think I was, a lot of people, of course, said, no, don't self-publish. But I'm thankful now that I did. I'm not so sure I would again, but I'm thankful that I did, because I feel that it led me to, again, like everything else that had happened before, being true to what I felt was a good enough product for me did lead to the next thing and the next thing. And again, it wasn't just me. It did lead me to bigger and wider communities that have been so instrumental in getting the book to where it's gotten. And yeah, it's still unbelievable that we're here talking, Selina. So I would say go out and do it. Do it how you feel is right for you. If it means self-publish, go for it. If it means, try until you get your traditional deal, then please, by all means, do what works for you.
Mhm. Very good advice. Very good advice. And especially I love the whole aspect of just knowing your truth, finding your truth and knowing your truth. Because I mean, I suppose that really is what anchors the why. And keeps you resilient in the process, because publishing from Africa is not for the faint-hearted. But also very interesting how you speak about tapping into and discovering the wider community, because I think there's an essence in which you feel heard, but you kind of rest in that as well, knowing that the story is real. It's not just you, and like it's connected to a bigger movement and narrative. And I think that's what we find very, very exciting here on the book club, is that we are just discovering so many amazing people. And there's such a sense of relief in that, because we're like, okay. I always often feel with the cultural movers, the creators, and definitely people in this side of the industry, that's where you start to listen and to hear the change. You start to hear the sound of rain very small. And so I think it's very, very cool what you're doing. And I think it's very cool that you gave voice to that truth, because it opened up the rest of our eyes to, I think, a larger story of Africa with more texture and more diversity. And I think that will be good for the next generation. So you talked a lot about hits and compliments. And before we start digging into the book, I just want to turn to that. And what surprised you? What hits surprised you, and what compliments took you aback in terms of the impact and the response of this book?
Wow, I think at this stage it's been so varied. The certain thing I know for sure is I wrote and published without expectation. So I didn't mind if I was going to sell 4 copies and carry on with my life. But for some reason, the story seems to have found a way of finding its own readers. It found its own publisher. I mean, it just did. It went, it's like the baby just went. The baby grew and did what it had to do. And when it did that, initially you think, oh, it's just family and friends. And then it starts to grow. The circle starts to grow. And when it does, each feedback or review, or I think even sometimes just private messages, is so varied, because I've had different things from ladies coming and saying, oh my gosh, I can so resonate from the father-daughter relationship, or some people coming and saying, I really just have this innate need to dig into my roots and, go back into maybe 2-3 generations and just have an idea where I come from. I've had quite a wide range of perspective, which is another amazing thing, because when you're doing it, you sort of think, oh, it's just this one linear body of work. But the way that it touches people is, I've come to learn, is very different. So I think I'm just appreciative of that, because ultimately all we're doing when we're writing that down is just trying to connect, with another human being and just express yourself. And the magic only really does happen when those people read and can resonate, even in the tiniest way. So I've managed, again, it's led me to meet different people such as yourself. I had a wonderful Sunday with another book club this weekend. And it's just, I don't know, I'm just really grateful for this journey. And I hope we'll keep going. And I hope it can be used later, which is my next step in the whole thing. I think the other reason I did self-publish was in order to understand the business of it, and the how to. So I would like to transfer those skills to other voices, the writing skills and so on. So I'm hoping that it takes me to the next level and allows me to engage in a way that we can grow more voices within Zambia and around the continent. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I think we haven't scratched the surface on the stories that can be told and that need to be told, definitely. And I think it's our time. And women like you and book clubs like ours all over Africa springing up, I think are the conversation that's definitely bringing that forth and ushering that era in. So for those of us who are watching, if you haven't read No Be From Hia, I strongly recommend it. I myself am yet to read it in its entirety. I've only been able to get my hands on a few sample chapters, but I have been struck very profoundly by what I have read so far. And I urge all of you to get a copy. For those of you watching from Harare, Book Fantastics, who usually stocks quite a lot of African female author work, did have the copy. They're currently out of stock, but if you get in touch with them, maybe we can build a little bit of pressure for him to bring a few more copies for us. For those of us who are in South Africa and other parts of Africa where there is exclusive books distribution, you could get the book through there. The easiest thing to do, though, is just to look up BlackbirdBooks on Instagram, Facebook, or their website online, and make an order through there, and they will find a way to get the book to you. And it's definitely worth getting the book. And it's definitely something that you will go through very quickly. It's easy. It's an easy read. There's a writing style that's very easy. And so to whet your appetite, let me tell you a little bit about the book. Maggie Oyemide and Upe Kombe are cousins on either side of the world who couldn't be more different. Zambian Nigerian and Zambian Jamaican, respectively, both yearn for their disbanded family to reunite. When Upe leaves Brixton to go to secondary school in Zambia, she brings light and disorder to Maggie's world. However, the girls are hindered by dark family secrets, such as the mysterious death of their late grandmother and Maggie's missing Nigerian father. From the blazing streets of Brixton riots to multi-party elections in Zambia to glitzy Independence Day celebration and adventurous nightclubs in Lagos, this heartwarming story breathes life into the modern-day result of post-colonial Africa and 20th century migration as it follows two ordinary girls trying to find their identity and reunite their family. So, when you'll get your copy of the book, and those who have read the book, it starts with a prologue around grandmother Margaret, who we have various flashbacks of throughout the book. But the storytelling or the narrative point of view is told through the story of these two girls. And the opening chapter is quite poignant. It takes us through Maggie witnessing quite an interesting conflict between her parents. And we start to begin and to hear and to feel and sense the issue of longing and the need to connect, but also just young girls and young people processing trauma. So in terms of the narrative point of view, I found it very interesting that you've got two very strong voices in first person that are carrying the bulk of the story. What I found very interesting is that the two people are tied together by blood. And so they have a very common generational experience, but it's filtered through the book in very unique ways. But what's interesting is there is a collective story. So us as Africans can read it and be like, wow, yeah, I get that. And then there are other aspects where you're like, no be from here. That's foreign. Okay. That is not what I know. And you're kind of like, wow, I never knew that about that culture. I never knew that about that ethnicity. And that comes through with both girls. But what I found very interesting is that together they work to kind of bring out a very rich narrative or composite of Grandma Margaret, who is what sparked the story for you, and who is someone who is very present, even though she herself never tells her story in her own voice throughout the book. So I found that very interesting about the narrative point of view. And then the first person voice was very interesting to me because the girls grow up over a certain period of time in the book. So the childlike voice is very interesting to me. And as they're growing older and starting to make decisions about who they want to be and meeting people and starting to gain an appreciation for the elders and their family as adults, right? Very, very interesting, the aging of those voices. And that must have been very difficult to do. And then there's the intimacy, because you paint pictures, like I was saying earlier, with strong, vivid detail. So for me, for instance, the picture of Maggie's father crying in the corridor with a knife to the neck of his wife and Maggie's mom, Stella, was like, I was like, whoa. And the Maggie's response, which is more felt than processed cognitively, because we know she's afraid because she wets herself, right? And because the frill on her dress is trembling. And then you're like, whoa, this is really traumatic. This is really hectic. And then the issue, the way that you unpack the custody issue, and you talk about how Maggie processes it in her grade 3 mind, the custard is like, I'm just like, whoa. And so there was a lot of showing, but it was in very vivid detail that you didn't overwhelm us with, because you picked specific things. And I thought that that made it very intimate, and it made it feel like I was now in the story. And I'm sure you've heard that from many other people. Yet at the same time, using that same first person narrative, you then balance it to make us look at this man whom we should be feeling like, this is, no violence to the women. Okay. We're like, bad man. Okay. We're like, why you're in this situation. And then in that moment, I'm also like, but in his own way, he loves this woman, but he just doesn't have the tools to do what he needs to do. And so I found that very, very powerful. How did you even get there to write from that point of view and be true to so many different characters, but using such a sophisticated technique?
Thank you for reminding me how unsophisticated my technique is. But again, I think it's just about, I think for me, I as a child, my parents in real life did split up very early. So I think I needed to leverage on a personal experience in order for me to take off with the story. And perhaps that's why you can feel it, because even now as an adult, I still, it's one of those things that you wish didn't happen, but it did. So I think I was able to just dare to go back and kind of try and remember what it was like to feel like at 8 when this kind of thing happens, and sort of transfer that to Maggie. And so I think I had to excavate. I had to dig really deep. But again, my style is pretty simple. It just is about telling how a person is feeling and what they see, or like you're saying, how they're thinking or processing a scene. So I try to keep it like that, close to the heart, I guess, close to the truth. And that's what we have today.
But I think the what scares me about writing in the first person is in keeping it close to the truth. You've got to present the truth in real time, in its present moment. And I think often when we tell each other things that have happened, and definitely when we're talking about childhood, when talking about home and family, there's an element in which we are speaking a sort of processed, this is the outline, this is what has happened, and we are already managing that narrative. But with this first person narrative, you took us through the processing in real time, and I for one think that is very powerful.
Thank you. But I also do feel, I know first person, I actually got 2 rejections based on the fact that the book was written in first person, and in a child's voice, and it should have been in third, and it should have been, I got all sorts of what it should have been. But I found it the most intimate device, so to speak. No, I tried changing it to third, but it just wasn't working. The truth was it worked in first. And for some reason, I was able to I don't think I went out deliberately saying I'm going to do it in real time. I just was able to connect to Maggie the way I did much more effectively in first person than it would have in third. So, and then secondly, like I'm saying structurally, if you read all of the book, you will find that grandmother Margaret's story, there's snippets of her story that are in third person. So you sort of have this narrator who, because everyone else in the book is in first and has no idea what's going on. So the device was to, okay, so the only third person or overall omniscient point of view that's going to take place is from grandmother Margaret's snippets in her life. So in the end, it ended up balancing pretty well, in my opinion. It, you know, everyone's subject to their own. But first person was just the voice for this book. I tried it. I looked. I had other editors say no, it should have been in third, but it felt right the way it was. So yeah.
No, well done for sticking to your conviction with courage, because I think now that is definitely being validated in the widespread response and resonance. Because, I mean, if we just look at the reviews and the readers of the book, a lot of people resonate with pictures of Nigeria, pictures of Zambia, pictures of the UK for them. And so there's an element in which I think we're honoring very much the lived experience of what it means to be African today for a lot of people. So that was really cool. Also in the first person, obviously, was the sound of our vernacular languages, which you didn't do the way that we are taught in school. So I think one of the aspects of the colonial system is that a lot of our vernacular languages were taught back to us in a tongue and a rhythm that was not actually the way that we spoke it at home, or we would hear it on the streets. And so No Be From Hia is actually Nigerian pidgin, but you do that with aspects of Bemba. And there are a lot of, dialects and nuances there in all of these different vernacular languages that the book touches on. So that was very interesting. And I think something else that also made it strangely enough, something that we could collectively identify with and say, that's very African to me, because I think the story of Africa is we're moving in and out of each other's spaces and boundaries so much that even on the streets of Zimbabwe, it's not weird for me to hear a Nigerian twang or a Nigerian accent or, someone from Zambia. And there are things that are very common to us because of that constant moving in and out of each other's spaces. And then there are things that are very particular to who we are. So the language was very, very, I think, powerful. And I think one of the ways in which I think African authors are starting to take back the story and starting to decolonize our minds and say, you know what, actually, this is how you would say it. And this is how it sounds. And so in terms of balancing that technically and with the English language, which has got its own stories, what was that like? I mean, did you have to consult people? Were you like, and especially with our local languages, which don't have grammar dictionaries, like, what was that like?
Yeah, so, the advice you'll get always is accents or dialects are always a risk, especially if for some reason any group of people is offended, or the way maybe the intention of the author is completely missed. So it's always a lot riskier than just writing straight English dialogue. But like you say, the nature of the story already is about the diversity of our heritage and our continent and our country and our, as you say, just in the market, I'll hear like 6 different languages between when I head in to buy tomatoes and when I come out. So it was important to demonstrate that multi-layered, sort of some of the visceral, sort of interactions we have on a day-to-day, which are not sort of linear or one line. It's, as you're saying, it's a lot of different stuff. But it was a risk, and I had to. And funny, my grandmother on my father's side, for some reason, before she died, she gave me a book of proverbs she'd been collecting and writing since the 70s, both Nigerian ones and Jamaican ones. And she said to me, I want you to write this, like do whatever you want with it. And at the time, I didn't know I would have the book later, but they were so helpful. A lot of the proverbs that are used in the book or referred to came from her. Some of the more the Zambian dialect in Bemba or Nyanja had to be gone over. I had to have a Jamaican reader go over any patois in the book, and I had to lean in on help from the Nigerians for any pidgin. So I did, like I'm saying, I had a great team of sensitivity readers and readers from other cultures who were there to help me. But I did just want to be true and write the dialogue in a way that I just hear it on my ear. So from a technical perspective, I don't know whether I did it right or didn't. I just wrote what I hear and what I've seen and what I've grown up with. And that is what you see in the book.
Definitely. But I think it's also one of those aspects that's true to the vivid rendering of detail in your book, because I think it's so important to write dialogue, how we hear it, because how we hear it gives us the feeling, it gives us the especially like the tone, and there's so much that's told without us having to elaborate with so many words. Now, in terms of the background, the context, the world building rules, the story is all movement, migration, movement, journeying around place, and obviously the place and space that everyone is moving to and from, or back to, or running away from is home. We've got Zambia, we've got UK, we've got Nigeria, we've definitely got Jamaican aspects in there. And so what I also found daunting, I was like, oh gosh, I don't know if I would have ever had the guts to do this, is writing different context, because you have to set a scene in a different context. And then all of this movement is taking place through time. So Grandmother Margaret's movements, which mirrors some of the movements the girls make in the book, are also happening across some of these different spaces. And so it's a lot of movement, it's a lot of migration. And what struck me is that all of that movement or that motion is around finding home, right? The who, the what, the where, and the why of home. And actually the home is found in holding space within the movement and not in a particular place. So I know that all of these countries are personal to you. So, and that I think is one of the techniques that you use to get in there. But I mean, in terms of writing the movement in time. So when we're looking at scenes from the past, how were you able to recreate and stay true to places or times and place you haven't been?
One, a lot of research. Two, I've been fortunate enough to be to almost all the places in the book. And some I actually visited after I'd written. Some before, like Lagos. There's some scenes from Lagos which are very genuine. So I had to rework that, go to the market, do it again, So I was fortunate enough to at least say I've been to the places I wrote about. I think except for Jamaica, which again, I've only ever known through the lens of my grandmother. So in that sense, I was able to keep it, what's the word? Again, more from that perspective, from someone who's never necessarily been there, but has someone really close who is from there. But the rest, that's, we've been there, they're all home somehow. But like, let's say when you talk about going back in time, I think maybe that is where the real struggle is, because how do you write Grandmother Margaret in 1954 when you weren't in 1954? And with her particular migration, it was at that time, it was mostly rural to urban, like in most countries in Southern Africa at the time. So it really was a lot of research, a lot of time in the archives, in the museums, and then just sort of trying to see what it would have been like in those days to have to move from everything, to the cities to follow this man who's, got this big dreams to free a country. So it was a lot of empathy, research and empathy together, I think, and then just hoping that you've captured it the way it should be captured. So yeah.
Well, the journey of grandmother Margaret following a man that she loved, because in a reading that you did on a show hosted by Zaki Savannah, what I found interesting was that in that story where they go to the butcher, her and Fabiola, it's no longer about Charles. It's no longer about the man. It's now about her. And that seems to be intertwined with her motherhood, the birth of her son. And there's a phrase or a statement that you make in the story, which is that she shuddered at the world he would find if this did not change. And so you get that very Nelson Mandela-like picture of courage. You can sense the fear, you can sense the risk taking that's happening. And it's a huge risk because they're all of this planning and organization for two women to walk into a store, basically. And then she goes through this harrowing experience. And I mean, it's truly traumatic. But what is the propelling thing is that there's an iteration for herself that this is actually about what I want. And it made me reflect and think about you being a mother of three. Is that part of the impetus in writing this book for your kids? Because there is a story that we get in this book that isn't taught in formal education. There's a history that's being told in this book that is not what we could even find on Wikipedia, right? Is that a mirroring of your own desire in this kind of writing and in putting pen to paper regarding the story?
Absolutely, it is. As I'm saying, the reason also for me to write it in the first place was this need to reconnect with generations before me. And I just really hope that in all the work I'm doing, that one day there'll be a great granddaughter or a grandson who picks it up and says, oh, wow, and somehow continues the work. Because also my grandfather was a writer as well, my Zambian grandfather. And somehow you feel like it's a continuation, and I was born after he died. So I haven't even met him, but I feel like we have this conversation by me continuing what he started, and I hope it will be continued. And definitely the forgotten histories, or sometimes histories told only from the one perspective. I think it's definitely a sense of agency and urgency that we get them out in whatever form, shape that we can, and retell the stories so that they don't die with the generations that are leaving us behind. And when we go, we need them to live, and be tangible and immortal. So that definitely drives my work. Yes.
I love that. I love that. And I love that. And I think, the journey continues, and it's actually going to be very, very interesting. The other theme, well, there's several themes in the book, but the other theme is what you keep talking about, which is the connection between generations, which paints quite a very interesting picture of family. And to me, that picture of family is so African, because in the book, Bupe as a child spends a lot of time imagining what Maggie could be like, having conversations with Maggie in her room, which I just thought was just so sweet, actually, really. But there is so before the bond is truly ignited in an intimate way, she's already talking to Maggie. And this is why I picked the quote at the beginning, because I really feel like they are looking for each other without even really instinctively knowing that that's what they're doing. And when they find each other, they find a sense of home in that family, because they're finding each other actually connects this larger, big network of all of these family connections that span time through the generations, but also space across the globe. So very, very interesting, the issue of family, love, place, peoples, and connection, and this picture of love, because there is romantic love, but actually the I think you've described it as love between the generations. What space do you think there is for that kind of love story now? And why is it so important for us now to actually just be embracing that kind of connection across the generations as Africans?
Wow, it is so important. Especially, having survived 2020, I think it can't get more important than now, Just on that note, Wupe in my initial draft was a very minor character. But everyone who read it was like, you need to pull her out. She is huge. For some reason, I didn't know that could happen until this process. So it's interesting because when I finally did get these girls, the chemistry was just not only incredible, but also symbolic of our relationship as Africa with our diasporic brothers and sisters. Which, over time, unfortunately, you get to see the diaspora Africa arguments and so on. And for me, that always just breaks my heart. So it was important to create these sisters and show that regardless of migration or things that have happened centuries ago or decades ago, that there is still a connection between us. Sorry. Sorry about that. There's still a very important fundamental connection between us and our sisters or cousins, brothers, whatever you want to call it, across the seas. And I still believe if we were to pull our resources together, pull our love together, that whole extended sort of Ubuntu, there is a lot that could take place. There's a lot that we could do together. And again, especially now and where we're going, if there was a way that we could go back and just tie all that together and make a really beautiful tapestry that we could go together along, I think it would be amazing. So it was very important for me to have Hope and Maggie express this need for each other. And like, as you say, just because you're not physically together does not sever the blood link or the history link that binds you as family. So yes, it's very imperative as we go forward.
Awesome. So we're coming to the end of our broadcast, but what I can tell all of you who've tuned in is we are not done from No Be From Hia at all. We've just begun. And when we can get our hands on the copies, we're going to do a book review of it later on in the year. So just keep following and stay tuned so that we can really unpack the book. Because what I can tell you is that there are many plots. There's a huge family secret to be revealed. Decisions are made, things happen, and we do not want to be left out of this page-turning, riveting tale. So once we get that up and running and we are ready to do that book review, we will advertise it here on the book club, and we'll let you know how you can be involved and where you can get your copies locally for those of you that might be joining us from Harare. So we have just begun, and we are looking forward to part 2 of this conversation, which will be a proper in-depth book review of No Be From Hia. But like me, I hope that many of you are eager to read this book, eager to get your hands on it and really give it the time and devotion it deserves. From what I've read, the 4 chapters I've read, I think that it's amazing, it's incredible. I think that it's very well written. And I am looking forward to taking the journey. And so, Natasha, I'm very grateful that you came to tell us about your journey in writing this book, publishing this book, and why you wrote this story. And as is our custom, as we wrap up the live, I'd like to ask you to do a reading of the book from the book for our viewers and listeners who will be catching us in real time and in internet time. And if any of you are interested, whilst Natasha is preparing that, in following Natasha on social media and stalking her as she goes and talks to book clubs and does readings, I strongly encourage you to do that. You can find her on Facebook on the handle at Omokhodion22. On Instagram at Tash Omokhodion, on Twitter at Tash Omokhodion. And if you've been following our adverts, we've been tagging her, so you can find out that information. And remember, we will let you know when the book is available in Harare for those of you who would like a hard copy, because we are sort of doing a slow pressure campaign on Mr. Book Fantastics. And then for those of you in South Africa and anywhere where there's an exclusive books, get in touch with Blackbird Books. They'll organize a copy for you. And those of you who have access to print on demand on Amazon, you can actually order a print on demand copy on Amazon in its republished format. So that's where you can get the book. That's where you can follow Natasha. And Natasha, close us out on this book club session with a reading.
Thank you, Selina. Thanks so much for having me, Thando Book Club. It's been amazing. And because Selina brought up the scene where Grandmother Margaret goes to the butchery, I'm going to read from there. So it is set in 1954, Northern Rhodesia in the Copper Belt, and Margaret's love rival and her are given an assignment. So I'll take it from there. The bunting along the glossy butchery flapped against its glass windows. There was no rain. The skies were a pleasant, cloudless blue. Margaret looked at the reflection of herself next to Fabiola. The vinyl sign pasted across the top of the glass door was emblazoned with Europeans only. A white family whizzed past her like she was invisible. They strolled into the shop. Children half her age were allowed to go through a door that she could not. She thought of how every Friday she lined up to purchase a parcel of sticky, rotten meat from the small hole in the wall at the back of the butchery. She closed her eyes to remember the flies buzzing towards the pong from the parcels she and her neighbors came home with. She thought of all the Africans around the country who, in solidarity, had said no to meat for the past few months. The vicious beatings and unnecessary imprisonment flooded her heart. In that moment, she felt deeply for all of them, as though each one of them were her son, CJ. She thought of the world which he would find if this law did not change. Shiny medallions of pork were served to the family in the window. The shop owner came around from the counter and knelt to talk to one of the children. He showed them a chart of a bull demarcated and labeled at different parts of his body. The children pointed at the shank and the rump. They livened up and licked their lips as their mother smiled proudly. Garnishes of parsley shone green around the face of a dead pig. It smiled at Margaret from its bed of ice. Fabiola, it's time. Let's go inside. The two ladies held hands and walked into the shop. Its bell sounded and its patrons reeled in disbelief. Read the sign on the door. You can get your meat like everybody else from the hatch at the back on Friday, an overweight butcher said as he wrapped his fingers along the counter. They made a heavy gallop that echoed across the room. We would like a kilogram of chuck and 2 dressed chickens, please, like everybody else, Fabiola said. You have to go through the back like all the Africans. It says clearly, Europeans only. Margaret interjected. Yes, indeed, but I am a citizen of Northern Rhodesia and unfortunately the Federation. I deserve to be served the same goods and services as everyone else, regardless of race, creed, or color, in any shop that I choose to enter. Please, can I have my order? 2 stone-faced men who looked like the butcher may have many moons before, stepped out to flank him. Fabiola continued to say the lines that they had practiced. So you are in violation of the United Nations Charter, Article 73. Can you promptly serve my friend and me, and we will be out of your way? Get out. If you look at the sign below that one, it says reserve the right to entry. I am well within the law to ask you to leave peacefully. Do we still have time, Selina? The ladies turned to look outside, and there was a line of smartly dressed picketers. Cameras snapped pictures. The ladies sat next to the European families who had resigned to being locked inside. We will wait until we are served. We have all day. They pulled out their yarns of wool and began to knit. The pair of burly men came from around the counter and lifted the duo. They carried the women kicking and screaming into a cold room. The ladies were thrown to the cold floor. They sat up next to each other. Carcasses swung low in rows of pink, and the metallic sharpness of blood filled their nostrils. After the steel door shut tight and the room went dark, Margaret dissolved into tears. My son, why did I let Charles talk me into this? What's going to happen to CJ if we die in here? Margaret banged on the door, on the walls, but they absorbed her actions, giving her silence in return. She flung her fists at the shadows of swinging beasts. I too had a son, Fabiola said quietly. Her voice filled the room as she sung of a baby taken away from her to a land far away, a baby who was neither white nor black, but both. Margaret froze, her heart breaking with each note. She sat next to Fabiola and they hummed together while they waited. By the time the authorities arrived, the entrance of the shop was cloudy with tear gas and the dispersing crowd was trotting down the road. Police escorted the ladies out, bundling them into the back of a Land Rover.
Thank you very, very much. And I hope that you've heard what you need to hear to go get your hands a copy of No Be From Hia. We definitely will be doing that, and we'll definitely be coming back with a fuller book review where we'll just talk about the book. And, you know, if you haven't read the book by that time we do the book review, I don't know, because we will be revealing spoilers. So thank you very much, Natasha, for that reading, and thank you very much for spending this time with us on the Thando Channel Book Club. To those of you that have joined us, Sappy and Tatenda, who were commenting on Facebook, and those of us who joined us on YouTube, thank you. We will be back here again next week at 7 o'clock, as usual, on Facebook and YouTube with yet another African female book lover. And you will enjoy what we have lined up next week. It's a little bit different, but you will really, really enjoy it. So stay tuned on the channel and find out those details tomorrow and Friday. So thank you very much, Natasha. May it go well with you, and we hope to see you back here again soon.
Thank you, Tatenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night, everybody. Bye.